Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ignite the Spark Within. I am your host, Sarah Malone. I am excited for today's topic, talking about the ego. And before we dive into any specifics of today's show, I want to invite you all, if you are new, if you are a returning listener, either way, if this show or this episode specifically brings you value in any way, takes you 2 seconds, just hit that share button. It's a free way that you can contribute to the support of this show because my goal and my mission is to reach as many people as possible, specifically with the information that helps us bridge the gap between human and divine, religion and spirituality, to help more and more people find that truth in the middle. Because let's be real, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of lies out there. There's a lot of distraction out there. And there's just a lot of plain darkness and evil out there. And I also want to pause for a moment to invite you to check out my new book, Affirmations for a Peaceful Life, Awakening from Within to Find Peace in a World Full of Chaos. This book can be found on all online retailers that sell books. Barnes& and Noble, Kindle, Amazon, and 200 other channels. And please remember to review and rate the book. This helps me to, again, be able to reach more people and get this message of peace and hope and spirituality out to the world. So today's topic is one that I am very passionate about. And there's a reason I'm very passionate about it. It's for what, number one, there's a lot of misconceptions on this topic of the ego. Kill the ego, that in order to be spiritual, you must be free of the ego. You must kill the ego. You must have an ego death, people say, right? But number two, most importantly, is because the proper understanding of the ego is truly our narrow gate, our narrow road through the gates of heaven, honestly, through understanding with wisdom what it means to be human and what it means to be spiritual. Without proper understanding and integration and harmonization of the ego, we cannot truly and fully have an understanding of what it means to be spiritual. And I'll dive into that later on in the show. What I'm seeing in the world right now is a major, major separation, a divide, and the spiritual warfare at play here. And at the end of the day, there are a couple different layers and levels of how this is happening. Number one, there is an attack on our spirituality as a whole. There's always been an attack because it comes down to a religion, and this attack from the religious standpoint, dogmatic, is this the same war that we've been fighting since Christ was alive. The other war, though, is on the other end of that, which is this new age spirituality that is total misinformation, hogwash, garbage that takes a little nuggets of truth and twists it to appeal to the senses, appeal to the ego. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is the concept that I am God. I am the creator of my life, that, I could just create. I could just be in heaven right now just by being in my own mind. Okay, this is a self-serving approach and attitude to spirituality that is borderline narcissistic, and it is harming people and disconnecting people, separating them more from the true God and the truth of spirituality and of who you are and who we are as a humanity, as a collective humanity. But the other one is even darker. It's more of a darker force, and it's more proactive on the scene. Okay, and this is the obvious attacks on our sexuality, on our gender, on our identity as a whole. This is the attack on our attention, our time, and all of this fear that is running rampant in the world right now. So there's a multi-layered, multifaceted attack on our direct connection with God, with the all. And so, as with all of these things, right, there is a deeper mission at play here in what's really going on in the underbelly of all of this attack of what we see on the surface, right? We see the politics, and we see the war, and we see the sexual crisis, and we see the identity crisis, we see the confusion, we see the fighting. All of that is the surface, the symptom of what's really going on here, because the attack really is at our identity. Oh my gosh. The attack really is on our identity as human beings and what it really means to be a human being living this human experience. And on both the spiritual side and on the physical, very egoic side of things, we are being duped. So tune in. We're about to dive deep into the ego, how it shows up, and you will be able to walk away from this episode seeing this darkness at play, and you'll be able to see the contrast very clearly between someone who is in their humanity and not in their humanity. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about humanity. Let's talk about spirituality. Let's talk about the ego. Here we go. That one of the questions I have is knowing the importance of the ego as it pertains to us as human beings, because it is an aspect of the human. Why are spiritual leaders, more spiritual leaders, I should say, not talking about this, right? The Bible talks about it. Jesus talked about it. Many people of the past talked about this. Maybe they didn't have a name for it. They didn't call it the ego, but they called it different things, thoughts, the spirits, right? Spirits that manifest me, spirit of jealousy, spirit of anger, spirit of depression, spirit of oppression, all of these types of things. And yet we've just stopped talking about these things as they truly exist. And the problem with that is that when we don't talk about it, we don't understand it. We misunderstand it. And by misunderstanding something very fundamental to the fruits of spiritual connection, we miss the opportunity to connect spiritually the way that we are actually intended and designed, and how God wants us to connect in that way. Okay. So what is the ego, right? I had somebody comment on one of my posts the other day that says the ego is a construct that we created and it's not real. Well, that's not true. It's not a construct. That is the exact misconception of what the ego truly is, that it's a construct because it's meant to confine us. The ego is not meant to confine us, even though it does at times, actually most times it does confine us, but that is because we have this misunderstanding. So the ego is not a construct. I want to make that very clear right out of the gate. The ego is an aspect of our humanity. It is something that we cannot avoid, we cannot deny, we cannot fight, we cannot kill. The ego is an aspect of us being human. It is part of what makes us human. Okay. Without it, we would be something different. We wouldn't be human. Okay. And if that means, though, if we believe, which I do, that we are made in the image of God, then that includes the aspect of the ego. That the ego is actually very important to understanding if we are to understand God as a whole, right? Not just what we read about. My gosh, not just what we read about, not just what we want to believe, not just what we feel, right? I feel like God is this way, or I feel like God is that way. Okay, but is that the truth? Okay, so if we are made in God's image, that includes the aspect of the ego. And so we can't kill it. We can't be rid of it. We can't overpower it. Okay. What we are to do here with the ego then is not to do any of those things. But when we talk about transcending the ego, I want to rephrase this and say that we are to transcend being a slave to the ego. Okay. I'm going to repeat that because it is so important. So important. We are not here to transcend the ego, to rise above in some status or position. We are to transcend being a slave to the ego. That's a very important differentiation. It's a very important differentiation because the problem is not the ego itself. The problem is when we become slaves by the ego itself. So before we even dive deeper into that, because that's a whole deep dive here, we need to unpack this aspect of humanity and the other aspects of what makes a human a human. Okay. So what is a human on a fundamental level? Now, we could talk about identity. I am this, I'm a mother, I'm a businesswoman, I'm a speaker, I'm a daughter, whatever titles, but I'm focused more on the spiritual aspects of what it is to be a human. So here we go. Are you guys ready? Grab your pens. What is the human? Okay. There are 4 aspects that make up the human. Here they are. Soma. Soma is the body. Soma. Somatic, right? We talk about somatic. Soma is the body. So body. Psyche, psyche being the mind, conscious mind, and subconscious mind. This is where the ego exists, right? Nous, Nous, that's the human spirit. Okay. So we just basically said body, mind, spirit, soma, psyche, nous, body, mind, spirit. And the fourth aspect is the spirit, the divine spirit. Okay. So soma, psyche, nous, spirit, body, mind slash ego, nous, basically the soul or the human spirit, and then the Holy Spirit. Those are the four aspects that make up the human being. The ego is part of the psyche. If we want to break that down, the psyche, the mind, okay, the conscious mind, subconscious mind, this is the ability for choice, for consciousness, for awareness, for observing, right? We have the ability to quite literally watch ourselves in a way, observe ourselves, have conversation with ourselves about it, make decisions based on it, rationalizing, running things through filter, analyzing. We do all of this. We do all this sometimes just like that in the blink of an eye, right? That's the psyche, that's the ego, that's the consciousness. That's the soul part of humanity. And it's very, 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 very important. Very important. And so the ego, then operating within the psyche, communicates within this network of an informational system, a communication system. And I want you to know this egoic perspective of us is not limited to the mind. See, in fact, the ego communicates via the body and the subconscious mind, right? It's actually also communicates with the external world, with energies around us, with the unseen world. Okay. This is what it does. It's tapping in all the time to gain information, to bring in information, to filter that information, to understand the information, then to make decisions based on the information very quickly. This is the ego. So these are the four aspects of what it means to be human, of what a human is. Remember that the ego is a very important part of this, because without the ego, let's just take out the psyche. Take out the psyche. We're just a body, a human spirit, and then the Holy Spirit, right? If you remove the ego completely, there's a whole missing, a huge missing network and piece of this experience that we know is a human experience. So let's just go back now and define deeper what the ego is. And so in order to understand this on the level of how it actually plays out in the world, we need to understand what the ego is. The ego is like the animalistic part of us. Okay. This is the part of us that responds and gets to senses and pleasures and instincts and survival and protection and feeling and emotion, right? The ego is meant to be the aspect of humanity that allows us to have certain level of experiences not had by other creatures, right? Joy, bliss, ecstasy. Also in the shadow parts, resentment, vengeance, jealousy, these types of things. And so the ego, being this kind of animalistic part of us, is very much instinctual. It wants to get its pleasures met. It wants to get its temptations met. It wants to get the pleasures of the senses met and satisfied. When left to its own devices, the ego wants and is very much naturally drawn to. This is just how it's naturally drawn. In other words, this is the shadow side of the ego. Okay. So because the ego is very animalistic in nature, it tends to be very instinctual, very impulsive, very much self-centered. Okay. And it naturally goes into that direction when left to its own devices, when left to steward itself, really. Okay. That's what we're talking about here, is when the slave becomes the master, meaning the ego becomes the master, then here's what we get, right? The ego wants and will devour these things, by the way. And when I say devour, oh my gosh. When I say devour, when I say the ego wants these things and it will devour them if it has the opportunity, chance to, with no stewardship, no leadership, no self-control or anything. Devouring means that it will bulldoze, kill, ruin, demise, trample over anything in its path in order to get these things. And here they are. Here are those things. What does the ego want and is drawn to naturally when it becomes the ruler? Power, right? The ego wants power. It wants to feel powerful. It wants the concept of power. It wants quite literal power. It also wants more. There's always this feeling of and spirit of more, never enough. I want more, 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 more of this, more money, more sex, more substance, more food, more pleasure, more, more, more. Okay. It wants satisfaction and gratification. Doesn't care about fulfillment. It wants satisfaction. It wants to satisfy the vices of the senses. When I say the senses, I mean all of them. I mean touch, smell, see, taste, hear, all of them. It wants all of it. More, by the way, more of it. And in fact, the more it satisfies and gratifies its senses, the more of it wants. Okay. It wants conquering and taking, right? So control, it wants control, another aspect of power, if you will. It also wants safety and comforts, right? It doesn't want growth. It doesn't want, by the way, this is the shadow side of the ego. This is the shadow side of the ego. Safety and comfort. That's it. I want to know that I'm safe. I want to know that I'm comfortable. And above, as outside of those things, I want to be pleasured. I want my pleasure. Okay. It also focuses on protection, which may not technically fall into the shadow side, except for when it starts to protect and defend its identity and beliefs, even though those identity and beliefs are illusions, delusions, or straight up lies. Okay, that's very important to note because the ego will defend a lie at all costs if it means avoiding having to admit that it was wrong about the initial. And that's interesting because we look around the world right now and we see that that is in full blast, right? That people would literally rather kill each other for their beliefs and what they believe about their identity than to say, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is something more here, or maybe it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. Right. And it also, this idea of protection for the ego may fall into the shadow category if it is clinging to this concept of control and certainty. Because let's face it, there's very little things that are certain in this world. And if we need that, then we will operate in a very non-ideal way in order to get those things. And the last thing I want to talk about it as far as the shadow side of the ego is that it will naturally be drawn towards negativity and darkness. And that's interesting because why? If we say that I am made in the image of God, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, right? I am made in the image of God and my ego is an aspect of God and all of these things, then why would I be drawn towards negativity and darkness? And here as it is, right? Why would we as humans with an ego be drawn towards these things, problems, negativity, darkness, the things that we're not supposed to do, right? Why is that way? And the answer is, and there's probably a deeper answer to this as well, but because it stimulates that animal part in us, right? Stimulates the job of the ego, which is to protect and survive and be on guard in that way. And so why don't we have utopia? Because then the ego wouldn't have an experience, a job. If everything is fine, we have transcended this time space of human existence and we have everything is utopia, then the ego loses part of its job. So it thinks. So it thinks. Is utopia possible? Is peace, world peace possible? I believe it is. But it's absolutely not possible as long as there is a shadow side to the ego. So that's the shadow side. Hopefully, we went deep enough into that to understand kind of like what that looks like. But let's talk about the light side of the ego, right? This is the true intended design of the ego, that when integrated and grounded, and I mean grounded, rooted, right, on the rock of truth and love, which by the way, there's only one way to go about doing that. And that's to be grounded in the truth of the Holy Spirit, of Yeshua and God the All. Okay. There's only one way to do that. You cannot in my angels, right? You cannot be grounded fully in my Catholic Church. Okay. You cannot be grounded in, well, the exact opposite of all of that would be that I am my own God. You cannot be grounded in those things, right? Why? Why not? Why not? Because there is only one love. There's only one light. There's only one. There's only one. The Catholic Church doesn't give that. The Pope doesn't give that to you. The religion doesn't give that to you. The angels don't give that to you because they are extensions of God. They are not God. Other gods don't give that to you. That's something else completely. Okay. The Holy Spirit, Yahweh, God the All. This Trinity, that's the only way. That's the only way to fully be grounded in this way and then to follow that way. Okay, so let's just talk about the light side of the ego. Here we go. In the light side of the ego, when we are living, by the way, when we are living embodied in the light side, right? There's the light and the shadow side. Okay. So light and the shadow side, there's the yin and the yang. It's the polarity of all of life is, right? And so in the light side of the ego, which means to have an integrated and grounded ego in the truth and love, we have a full experience of the whole array of emotions. Okay. When we are living in the light side of the ego, we are able to feel a whole array of emotions in its fullest embodied experience. Okay. That means we are able to feel deeply the sensation of joy. We are able to feel deeply the sensation of sadness, of sorrow. We are able to feel deeply the sense of pleasure. And I want to talk about pleasure just for a sidebar here. This is important. In the spiritual sense of pleasure, there are 3 levels to this, okay? There's the soma level, the body level, and that's pleasure, right? It's pleasure. It's pleasure of my senses. Sexual pleasure, food pleasure, visual pleasure, like, oh my gosh, look at this beautiful scenery. This is hearing, right? This is pleasure of my hearing. I hear the birds and it brings me pleasure. I hear music, great music, and it brings me pleasure. Okay. It's smelling. It's all this pleasure of the senses. Okay. That's the base level of pleasure. That is the one, by the way, that is the level of pleasure that most people seek and stop at seeking. And this is where we cross into the shadow side of the ego, where we go, this is all about satisfaction and gratification of my senses rather than a deeper level of joy, which I am promised, by the way, by living this human experience in the truth and love, which is joy of the mind. That's happiness. Okay, so soma, psyche, joy of the mind, joy of the psyche is happiness. I'm happy. Okay, even that's temporary as well. Even that's temporary too. Remember, pleasure of the senses, temporary. Pleasure of the mind, temporary. Pleasure of the spirit, the nous, the human spirit, that's joy. That's joy. And joy is a spiritual state, you guys. It's a spiritual state. And ironically, I can be in a state of joy and still feel sorrow. I know that sounds really crazy, but I can be experiencing grief and still be in the spiritual state of joy. And there is where we cross into the light side of the ego, where I can still be experiencing grief and sorrow and all of these things and have the fullest experience of that without having to attach any meaning or definitions to it, just to be having the experience. Okay. Also in the light side of the this the egoic aspect of us, when integrated into the light, will express this wonderful creativity from the divine creator himself. So this will be a creative, serving side. And we see this in people and humans all over. It's like, oh my gosh, the creative energy that humans have the ability to harness is phenomenal. That's the light side of the ego, right? Gosh, what happens if we didn't have that? this world would be a very sad place, right? And the light side of the ego, basically what I'm talking about here, by the way, guys, is enlightenment. It's enlightenment. And the light side of the ego, we will have a full presence and awareness of being with a capital B, meaning God, right? So we have this full presence and awareness of being one with God. It's this feeling of oneness. There's no separation, there's no distinction. There is, I am in oneness with the being. I am being in oneness with the all. This is when the ego is integrated. Also, the ego will grow and learn and create. This is the light side of the ego, right? That's again, back to the creative energy that comes through in the form of the ego, right? And then the last thing I want to talk to you about when it comes to the light side of the ego is this relational connection, right? The ego is very relational. It's very much focused on connection, community, people, my connection to you, my connection to myself, my connection to God, my connection with everyone, the ability to have conscious relationships and be in these sorts of collaborative conscious relationships is a light aspect of the ego, and is absent of my need to rule over you in this relationship, my need to have power over you, my need to be better than you, my need to um, always feel in control in this situation, right? It's the ability to be in relationship in a way that is absent of manipulation from a place of fear, because that's the only place that manipulation can come from, is a place of fear, right? So it's true love. It's being in a space of true love with other people, not just in intimate relationships, in all relationships, all relationships. It's to have these conscious relational connections with others that are absent of my need to feel the illusion of control within them. Does that make sense? And so again, I'm just going to say, this is what we're really talking about here, is this is what enlightenment really is. This is what enlightenment is. It's the ability to merge and bring into wholeness the light side of the ego while experiencing fully our spiritual nature. The truth is that when the ego is in its light, it is very much connected to the divine, to the spiritual. In fact, to know fully the divine, we have to know fully our humanity. We have to know fully the human aspect, the egoic aspect. There's no way for us to fully comprehend or experience our intended experience of this divine spiritual nature of ourselves, the world, and of God without bringing the ego into the light. And in order to bring the ego into the light, oh my gosh, you have to bring the light into the shadow. And the only way to do that, by the way, is to bring in the only thing that is light. And that is the presence of the all, the being, God, the spirit, the divine spirit. That's the only way. So in a way, what we're saying is it's impossible to have one without the other. If I truly have God, then I truly have the light. And if I truly have the light, it will also be shown on my ego. And my ego will be brought into the light. In fact, another word for God is logos. Logos incorrectly was interpreted as just the word, but more specifically, logos as a term or word for God is interpreted as the creative word. Okay. More specifically, this word, it animates. Okay. It commands, it orders, there's an action to it. There's a very intentional action to the word logos, and this word that is spoken, quote unquote, spoken into existence, illuminates the human. Okay. The logos, the word God, is the only thing that illuminates the human being. Isn't that so interesting? Okay. So anything else that you have, false light. Okay. And this is so ridiculous now in this day and age, because there's so much new age caca bullshit, baloney about the light, right? What the light truly is. There is only one true light, and that is the Logos, the all, the being, God. Okay. The Logos meaning the creative word of God that literally illuminates the human. It also brings order, commands, and has intentional order to the world, to you, to the human, to everything that exists. Okay. Very, very important, because what I'm basically saying here is this, that if you have one fully, correctly, you will also have the other fully and correctly. Okay. Otherwise, in the absence of, oh my gosh, in the absence of the true light, all we really have is the ego in its animal form. My gosh, the ego in its animal form and a human spirit with no divine spirit to illuminate it. So, what does that look like? A world full of animals devouring each other. That's what it looks like. A world full of people who want power, control, gratification, satisfaction, pleasure of the senses, right? With no illumination to the ego itself. And we call the ego bad. What's really bad is a human who is disconnected from the light. That's what happens. Because the truth is that we cannot be in the light of the ego without the presence of the Holy Spirit, the true light. And even if people appear like they have it all figured out and they're enlightened and they're all of these things, if they have a different source of light, which is almost an oxymoron to even say, because you can't just be like, I have a different source of light and then call it light. It's different something else. It's a different something else. Then they don't truly have this full illumination of the being. Okay. And this is what it means to say we cannot have two masters, right? Because we cannot be slaves to the ego and also have the divine. We can't. We can't. We will serve one and neglect the other. And most of the time, people end up servants to their ego. Why? Because they have a misconception of it. They have a misconception of what the divine is, of who the divine is. And there is a disconnect. There is a lack of light. There's an absence of light within the human, creating only a shadow, darkness, right? Within the human. That's all there could be. That's why it says, I was in the dark. Right now I'm in the light. Or the kind of parable of the blind man, right? Not being able to see or being sleeping. Okay. This is what it means to be in the dark, to be absent, to be separated, to be disconnected from the light. You cannot serve the ego in the shadow and also be in the spirit of the spirit. You cannot. You cannot. You also can't just say just human nature, because being what it means to be fully human. To be fully human, by the way, there's a word for that. It's called, in Greek, it's anthropos. Anthropos means to be fully human. And that's not to live in the senses. That's not to live in the shadow side of the ego. That's to be fully human, fully embodied in soma, psyche, nous, being soul, right? The small aspect. The nous, by the way, is the small aspect of the human. It's very small center core that connects us. It's almost like the bridged aspect, right? That connects us to human and to spirit. Okay. It's a very small aspect, but it operates within the psyche. It's the nous. And this is what it means to be fully human, right? To be integrated, to be in the light, to have our ego in the light, not the absence of the ego. Okay. Or not the opposite, which is just to live of the ego. Right? People say, oh, it's just human nature to be resentful and all of these things. No, it's not. Actually, the true designed human nature is to be fully in love and fully connected with the divine. That's the true human nature. That's the true intent of human beings. So we can't just normalize, dysfunctional or shadow side of the ego. You can't just normalize it and say that's human nature. No, because human nature is what it was intended to be, not what we've made it up to be. And let's face it, humans have a great way of ruining things, ruining good things. That history shows us that. But the whole purpose here of what Yeshua came to teach us was not just to die on a cross for us, right? Yeshua did not come just to die. That was not his sole purpose. In fact, his sole purpose was more to show us how to live, and not just live in a godly way. Yes, for certain that, but he came to show us how to be fully human. And to be fully human doesn't mean that we just are absent of all emotions, sadness, grief, all of these things. Jesus wept. Jesus flipped tables. Okay. But these aspects of him were integrated in a way where they were not the master. He was not a slave to the ego, the senses, the human experience. He was the master of them. And he was the master because he had the light. He was the light. He is the light. That is the true purpose. That is his true purpose, his walk. And it's so sad sometimes to look around and see that the church and others just focus on his crucifixion and his death. And then he rose again in 3 days, and almost glorifying that to say, thank you, thanks for coming to save me. And now I just await my own death to that day where I can ascend up with you. When it's like, we're missing the whole message here. We're missing the whole purpose. And that purpose is we were shown in a beautiful way how to live fully, how to be fully human, and fully divine all at the same time. And what would the world look like if we fully embodied that? Not the animal part of the ego, but the light. This is true enlightenment. This is our path to enlightenment. It's not to transcend, to rise above something, right? It's actually to bring it all here. It's to be the human being is the bridge to God being able to be fully present here. And the only way that God can be present here is through us. That's why he created us. Could he be, the omniscience and omnipotence of God exists very naturally. He doesn't need us. It doesn't need us. I should say it doesn't need us, but this is the way to bring it fully embodied, right? So in everything that we're seeing and experiencing and living, honestly, we are either extensions of the all, okay, of God, true God, or we're extensions of the animal and animalistic nature and expression of a human. It's either one or the other, because you cannot serve two masters. So how do we know when we are in the shadow or when we are in the light side of the ego? So here are some common things to look around. Is this list all encompassing? Probably not. But here are some common things to look out for as an experience, as a lived experience, to know if you're in the shadow or in the light. Really, it comes down to this. If any form of neurosis is present in the human, we are in the shadow, right? If we are in depression, shadow. If we are in resentment, shadow. Jealousy, shadow. Power hungry, shadow. Manipulation, shadow. Okay. Any form of neurosis that the human has, we are in the shadow. This does not mean that you have to be perfect. Nope. This does not mean that you can't have negative emotions or mistakes or make mistakes in these types of things. This does not mean that you are absent of negative emotions or thoughts or the like. It is to have them, again, coming back to this, but it is to have them and not be a slave to them. Okay. We do not have to act on every thought, stimulated idea, or feeling or action that's done towards us. We do not have to act on any one of those things. We choose to. Okay. We choose to. Those are the responses that we choose to express into the world based on whatever factors are present. The idea of being enlightened and operating from this place of being rather than in the senses and the animal part of the shadow side of the ego is to have the feelings or have the experiences without acting on them in a way that would induce sin or wrongdoing. Sin is a whole other topic for a whole other episode because we create sin. There is no actual sin. God didn't create sin. We create sin by being in that way. But the idea of being enlightened is not to be absent of these things. It's to integrate them and have them in a way where we cease to be slaves to them And in fact, we allow ourselves to experience them without having to act upon them, right? Anger becomes resentment when we fail to act accordingly or we act in ways that are incongruent with the light side of the ego, with love, right? And so we know we are in the light side of the ego when we are operating from a place of being rather than the senses and trappings of fear, obligation, power, and any of the other aspects of the shadow, right? Instant gratification. Let me satisfy my senses. Let me satisfy my senses. Let me avoid being vulnerable in a relationship, in loving relationship with somebody because I'm scared, right? So some of these signs are going to be some very common personality and relational expressions that we have, like people pleasing, addiction, codependence, right? Honestly, unhappiness in life in general is a sign of being in slavery of the ego. Because we are based in this unhappy state, we are not in the spiritual state of joy, in the mind, anyways. And instead, we are saying to ourselves, things should be a different way. Things shouldn't be this way. They're not the way that I want them to be. I'm unhappy. So attacking in nature. Also, another sign of being in slavery to the ego is being closed off, being so rigid and closed off to, and we're talking like ideas, beliefs, people, love, feeling, anything like that, right? Or the opposite of that would be to have zero boundaries, to be boundaryless, which is also awful. Lack of self-control, right? It's like I feel something and my emotions get so high, I need to act on it right now. I've had some clients that are like this, where it's like the emotions just go, oh, up and down like a roller coaster. And when they're down, they like everybody in their life knows it. They get text messages. So it's very erratic, very erratic. So lack of self-control. Also, that can come to sex, self control with food, self control with substances, self control with feelings, self control with expressing our feelings to others, right? We just spew. Okay. Another one for this is the need for external validation. Okay. External validation is a sign that we are enslaved to the ego because it says, I'm not good inside. I'm not right inside. I'm not enough inside. I need something outside of myself to tell me, right? I forgot who I am. That's basically what that is. Need for external validation is saying, like, I forgot who I am. I forgot my connection with God. Okay. Another one of this is going against what is right. We all know what is right. I could really go in the rabbit hole on that one, especially with the topic of abortion and transgender and homosexuality and these types of things. Cheating, stealing, lying in any way, shape, or form. I could steal ideas. I could steal money. I could steal people's joy. I could steal many, many things. I could cheat people, or operating from a place of self-righteousness, right? This is honestly, in the influencer day and age, this is a lot of people, unfortunately. This is like the search for feeling self-important has really been eye-opening with the presence of social media and marketing strategies and things like that. It's really all about that. It's really being enslaved to the ego to say, I need myself, my ego needs to feel important. I need follows, I need likes, I need status, I need this, I need lot. Okay, another one, slavery to the ego, distraction, inability to focus my thoughts, inability to focus my own focus, really. Inability to focus my own focus, to focus my own thoughts, to focus my own feelings, distraction. Again, social media, TV, the news. I also want to just touch on that because what we're really saying here, if you guys notice a common theme here, it comes down to a big F word, and that's freedom. In a way, all of these things, when we are giving into them and giving ourselves up to them, we are just that. We are slaves, right? We are trapped. We are confined. We are confined by the ego. By operating and living in this way, it's so interesting to see that, like, my ability to have lack of self-control, or my closed offness, or my lack of boundaries, or my people pleasing is actually confining me. So interesting. We are putting ourselves in prison and then being mad at the world about how that is. Okay, another one, and I'm just going to fly through these now. Appeasement, resentment, and I'm going to say resentment, not anger, because anger is a natural part of the human experience when integrated correctly in the light side of the ego. Anger is a feeling and an emotion to be able to feel fully and gain information and wisdom from. Anger, when executed in order to induce harm, is a shadow side of the ego, and we are now enslaved to that. Another one is making any decision based out of fear, intentional harm to myself. I'm going to talk about harm on others in just one moment. Intentional harm to self or self injury. And by the way, there are so many more, right? There is this at all, like I said, is this a fully robust and all encompassing list of what it looks like to be enslaved to the ego? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But what is it for you, right? What is it for you? Because we all have our things. We all have our things. And to say that we can be totally either, this is not a black and white. This isn't a, I'm either slave to the ego or I'm not. It's in any given moment, right? This is the beautiful part about the human experience. In any given moment, I have the option, I have the choice to be slave to the ego or to be free, to be in the shadow of the ego or to be in the light. I have the ability to do that. I have the option to do that. And I get to choose, especially when I'm aware. Once awareness is present, now I really have more responsibility. I have more responsibility to do something with that awareness, to make a choice. And now, once the awareness is there, it's like anytime I choose to remain in the shadow, I'm consciously choosing to remain a slave. I'm consciously choosing against the light. Now, there's one last level to being in the shadow, because everything else is just part of the human experience, right? It's part of the human experience. It's not a nature of our humanity, but it is it's a natural process of being human, is to navigate these types of neuroses, to navigate people pleasing, to navigate addiction, to navigate resentment, to navigate all these things, right? This is the whole point. This is the whole point of being human, to navigate that, to grow, to learn, to have the experience, to make the choices, to do the things. Okay. But there's another level that we can descend to if we're not careful. And this is where we are today in humanity. Looking around, we have a lot of this. And this is what it is. This, when we have lost our soul. Okay. This is a dark place to be. And actually, this is what's happening a lot right now. A lot right now is we are witnessing a lot of soulless people due to this next level of being in the shadow of the ego. And here are the points to look for. You're going to be able to spot this right away now once you go out into the world and you look on just everything that's happening. Okay. Here it is. Wishing harm upon anything or anyone, any living thing, wishing harm and doing harm. Like the next step to that would be doing harm. Okay. Wishing, intending, doing, and acting on any living thing, anything or anyone. This includes verbal aberration. This includes physical harm. Okay. Another sign we've lost our soul. It's promoting death, destruction, and ungodliness. Ungodliness is another topic that we can dive into, just not on today's episode. Promoting death, destruction, ungodliness. Ungodliness, in my terms, and what I want you to think of it is in today, is taking anything that is sacred, that is designed to be sacred, and making it dirty. Okay. So a great example of this today is sex. Taking something sacred, like the sexual union between man and woman, and making it dirty with children, with changing my gender, with polyamory, with sex groups, sex cults, with sexual rituals, right? In groups, alone, whatever that may be. And I'm sure there are more, but the sex one is really, really big right now. So ungodliness is taking something sacred and making it dirty. The other one, where when we have lost our soul, is confusion of identity. Again, this is going to come back to the transgenderism, confusion of identity. Who am I? Or even the new age spirituality. I am God. Okay. When we have lost our soul, there's also a separation or a denial of God, right? We have people that are blatantly denying and blaspheming and mocking God. Most importantly, mocking Yeshua. So a separation of myself from God or denying God altogether. And the other one I want to touch on is consciously using power to manipulate, control, kill, or further my own power. This is another one where we have lost our soul. Okay. What's interesting about this list is that with most of the big things that are highlighted in the news right now, highlighted in social media taglines, everywhere you look, it seems like this is what's happening like the most, is that we have crossed into a plane now where, at least this is what we're seeing, where we are living in a world with a lot of soulless people devouring each other, devouring themselves, ripping each other's eyes out, killing each other. And the reason I say that this is when we have lost our soul is because the whole point of the soul is, again, this humanity of us, which means if I have my soul, I can't harm you because human, we are humanity. Does that make sense? Soul intact means I see you as a human just like me. When we lost our humanity, when we lose our humanity, I should say, we lose our soul. Okay? There is a divine intent in order to all of this. And people think they're fighting for some higher cause and all of these things by fighting about their identity and their gender and all these things, when really we've just been duped by the devil. Because when I enter into that fight, when I'm fighting against you for this, I forgot that you're human. And maybe you forgot you're human, right? To say you're non-binary, or you're neither, or you're both genders, or you were born the wrong gender, or whatever that may be. You forgot who you are. That's the biggest casualty. That's the biggest tragedy here, is that. Because now in that process of signing on to the lie, you lost your soul in the process. I know that's hard to hear, and it feels pretty extreme, but the truth is usually that way. There's a divine intent and order to all of this. And that includes gender, by the way. Gender, male, female, is a part of the divine order. Male, female is an aspect of God. Union, that way. We could talk about that. Sex between union, conscious union between man and women, is actually an inclusion and an experience of God that is unlike any other, especially when there's conception. Because there's the presence of the creative word, the logos. The actual logos is at work right there through sexual union between man and woman. And that cannot happen between women. That cannot happen between men and men. That cannot happen between a man who thinks he became a woman and vice versa. So this attack on the identity, which is going to be the topic of the next podcast on the transgender movement right now and the spiritual identity that is actually at risk. I'd like to keep it away from more political standpoints because it's not political. This is spiritual. This is spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual topic that we're talking about when we talk about transgender and changing my identity as who I am. Part of who we are is our gender. And it's very important. It's not just something to scoff at and say, this is just a social construct. No, it's not. It's a spiritual concept. It's a spiritual aspect of who you are. Because there is only one place that God can truly exist in that very, very special and very, very creation, like beginning of creation type of way. And that is through the union between man and woman. Conscious connection, sexual intercourse, yes, I'm talking about that, and conception. That's the only place that God is present in that way, in that very special way. That's in the beginning, right? In the beginning, God created. And actually, it's in the beginning, the logos, right? Creative word. So the next episode is going to touch on this and how this is an attack on our spiritual identity, our spiritual connection with the one true God, not our human titles, labels, but our true identity. Yes, gender is included in that. Okay. We need to be very clear on that. We will also have a part 2 on this ego topic as it pertains to how can we work with it. So now I know, right, what it looks like to be in the shadow side of the ego. Now I know what it looks like to be in the light side of the ego, and what the purpose is of both. Why it's important, right? Why it's important that I understand the ego. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I apologize about this light show that you're having right now. My whole body's illuminated. Go figure. We'll have a part 2 now that we know these things. And if you need to listen to this part a second time, I highly encourage that because there's a lot of information that I just covered here. lot of information that I just covered here. So feel free to listen to this times two. Next ego episode will be on how do I harmonize and bring this more into the light? How do I become more integrated? How do I become more fully human? And we're going to use Jesus as the model for that because, well, he was the only one who came here to show us how to do that fully. Okay, so what I want to know from you guys is for this next ego episode, if this topic is interesting to you and you have questions that you want me to cover on this next part two ego episode, please send them in to support@sparkflc.com and we will work to curate the best questions and most common ones that come through and answer them on that next ego episode as a follow up to this one because it's such a dense topic and deep dive into all of this. I hope you were able to follow. I hope this was interesting to you. Again, if you have curiosities and want to know like more details into something that I went into, please do let me know. Again, email those at support@sparkflc. The next episode we will talk about, though, is the spiritual identity, the crisis, and the attack on our spiritual identity. In order to, all of this is an agenda to disconnect us from the one true source of God. I really hope that this episode was valuable to you guys. Again, all I ask from you is just one thing, right? If this blessed you, if it brought you value, if you think that somebody else might be interested, just share it with them. Just share it. That's all. That's all. Thank you so much again for listening. Again, go check out my book, Affirmations for a Peaceful Life, because in there we're talking a lot about how to find the truth in the middle, right? How to bring everything that we're experiencing into the middle so we can have this spiritual state of peace. I love you all. Blessings to you. It's good to be back. And until next time, we will talk to you very soon on identity and the spiritual crisis. Love you all.